Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I am your host, Robert Stanley. Today's episode is a treat, ad-free, and going to be a little bit different from what my listeners are used to. I'm going to have pie and coffee with a Christian apologist. Dan Ray is joining me in a coffee shop today, and we are going to talk about the origin of the universe. Well, just kicking back like a couple pals. Then we'll have the coffee shop owner come by and tell us about the grind. Sorry, dad joke. That conversation goes on a good hour and a half, so I thought we'd do this episode just like we did the Blake Juta debate and leave off all the ads. Musician plugs, activist spots, GG, trivia, YouTube topics, all of it. Just two guys in a coffee shop talking about life and why we're living it. So ease back, relax, pour yourself a cup of whatever you're having, and let's reason together.
Cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
And I think it should be religion treated with ridicule and hatred.
Oh my God, I gotta tell you guys about the funniest thing that happened with Dan before we started. This was hilarious. But first, you have to have a little backstory, all right? Dan's been on other podcasts and even started one of his own recently, but he's still this kind of academic, smarty pants, kind of shy person, right? Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, he's very well spoken, as you'll find out, but he's just not, well, he's not a big mouth a-hole like me, you know? He's normally kind of reserved guy, right? So the day that I scheduled to do this, the coffee shop that we were meeting at was having a camera crew there to advertise the business just before our time slot for the podcast recording. So here comes Dan walking up, and I'm standing there with about half a dozen camera people, a lady that looks like a newscaster, assistants taking notes, like following her around and stuff. Some douchebag. This guy with his shiny suit, he had the bald head, he's got shades on inside, you know, gold chain, and I come walking out from this maze of intimidation, and Dan Ray's like, "What the hell, Robert?" Like, you didn't tell me about this. Anyway, those weren't his exact words. I can't remember his words exactly, but it was hilarious. Before we get to all that, let me do some quick housekeeping. You can watch videos of the show on YouTube. Support us at patreon.com/right. That's RIGHT, as in Right to Reason, or on our website by clicking the donate tab. That's at therighttoreason.com. Talk to us on our Facebook page or follow us at Right to Reason 1 on Twitter. All right, Coffee and Pie with an Apologist starts right now.
Culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions, churches, companies.
We very naturally, as a cognitive and behavioral imperative, we form descriptions of the world, and we try to figure out what's going on.
If you base the design of rockets on science, they reach the moon. It works, bitches.
Happy to have Dan Ray here with us. Dan, can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us who you are and where you come from?
Yeah, I live up in the DFW area, and I was recently on Dogma Debate where you heard me.
Yeah, you were awesome.
Thank you. It was fun. David's a good guy. Episode 333, and that was the second time I was on Dogma Debate. I just finished up my master's degree in Christian Apologetics last summer, and I am working on a more professional path toward pursuing apologetics at the present time. I live in Dallas, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and have really enjoyed, this will be my 6th time on an atheist podcast.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Why are you picking on atheists, man? You got something good.
I'm being asked. Every atheist shows that I've been on, I've been asked to do it. So this is kind of fun. So you contacted me a couple weeks ago, and here I am. So it's kind of fun. I never thought I would end up doing this. I'm such a low-key, non-confrontational person, and for the first part of my Christian life, I would shy away from a lot of hard questions that people would ask because I was like, I don't know, and I still don't know, but that's okay. There's things that I do know, there's things that I don't know, and I enjoy the conversation.
So the listeners should know that Dan and I have been talking for probably a good 30 minutes to 45 minutes here already, just kind of shooting the bull, and then he puts on his glasses. And I'm immediately intimidated because I feel like I'm talking to Professor Ray here now.
No. I don't have my doctorate yet.
So if you hear the ambient sound coming in, the reason is that we are actually in a coffee shop, and you can hear people ordering and music in the background most likely, but we're sitting here eating pie, which is the craziest thing ever. Dan, why are we eating pie?
Well, as made famous on Dogma Debate, we've David and I have eaten pie twice now, and I love to make pie. It's my mom's recipe, and it's just been one of those things where it just kind of dovetailed into when I meet people for the first time. It's a wonderful icebreaker, and I love to make pie. I love to eat pie. So here you are. So it's homemade, crust,
I think
and everything.
Anyone that doesn't like pie is a horrible human being.
And so if you have listeners that want,
probably.
If you have listeners that want the recipe, I can give you my email, and people can contact me, and I will give them the recipe.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. Real quick, you want to do the email now, and then we could do it again right at the end in case anybody missed it.
Yeah, and it's more than pie if you want to have a conversation too as well. My email is psalm, like Psalm in the Bible, PSALM 1968 at gmail.com. That's Psalm 1968 at gmail.com. Conversation, pie recipes, or if you just want to yell at me, bring it on. That's okay.
Jesus and pie.
There we go. Well, you know the famous opening of Carl Sagan's episode, "The Lives of Stars." Oh yeah, you need to Google it. Carl Sagan and apple pie, and there's a short little clip that begins the episode. He's in the Cambridge dining facility, and the scene opens up where a Granny Smith apple is floating in space. And you think it's a planet at first, and then a cleaver comes down on the apple, and you're like, whoa! And then it breaks into a montage of pastry chefs putting together an apple pie from scratch in the Cambridge kitchen. And then they bring the pie out to Sagan. The butler brings the pie out to Sagan, lays it on this immaculate dining table, and Sagan looks in the camera and goes, "If you wish to make apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe." And so
I've heard the line. I've never seen.
Yeah, that's a great little episode.
That's cool.
I wish Tyson had redone it, but since
that was part of Cosmos.
Yeah, that was the original Cosmos. He needed
weird.
The Lives of Stars. You need to check that out. It's on YouTube. The little
I've heard
pie
you talk
clip
about Pale Blue Dot before. And I think that's probably one of those beautiful clips from him that I've ever heard.
Yeah, the Pale Blue Dot story. Are you familiar with all that background, what it is, and how it came about? If I may, I will. Would you like me to read it?
Sure.
Yeah.
But before you do, I just want to say, Peggy's Coffee House is where we're at right now, and excellent cup of coffee that we're having. What are you having?
I'm having their Mocha Java with a shot of espresso in it. It is absolutely delicious, and they French press it, and it's awesome.
That's like liquid crack. That sounds like a lot of caffeine there.
Well, actually, the dark roasts don't have as much caffeine, but when you put the shot in it, then it kind of boosts it up, right?
And I'm having something with ice. So I don't know what it is.
You had a nice latte. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, it's an iced latte, and I'm eating Dan's apple pie. So this is perfect.
Yeah,
this is a perfect morning. Anyway, hit us up with some Pale Blue Dot, brother.
All right. So this is Carl Sagan from. Well, let me set it up first because it's one of those scenes where you can look it up, and if you type in Pale Blue Dot, what you'll get is, if you Google image Pale Blue Dot, you will get a beam of sunlight in darkness. And then inside that sunlight beam is a tiny blue pixel. You can't hardly see it. And that's Earth, taken from the satellite Voyager. Voyager 1.
It was the ring, like Saturn's ring was the light.
No.
That's
this
actually a sunbeam?
Well,
Did I see?
what it is, it's a reflection from Voyager. It's a beam of light that was reflecting off of Voyager.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it actually, when Sagan was advocating before Voyager left our solar system to turn Voyager around to take one last family portrait of all the planets, which it did. And the most iconic of them, of course, is ours. But it's the tiniest little thing you've ever seen. So the sunlight is actually a reflection from the satellite itself. But there we are, Earth, and it's about, I think it's 3.7 billion miles away from as Voyager's backing out. So Voyager's backing out. Sagan, it costs money and time to turn them around, to turn the satellite around. And so the images came back a pixel at a time on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1990. And so the images were downloaded in the days, when we had slow computers. Imagine the patience that the astronomers needed in order to wait for that picture to come back. Yeah. So that is the background for what Sagan writes about it. And there's a book that he wrote, one of the last books that he wrote, called The Pale Blue Dot, a vision of the human future in space. And so that's where this comes from. He says, that's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you have ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives, the aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor, explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. That's the Pale Blue Dot quote.
Beautiful.
It's remarkable.
Beautiful. Now, I hear that, and my first thought is anti-war, anti-religion as a result of hearing that. Like, that's the first impression that I get is, what are we fighting about? There's no reason to have all these wars. And also, why are we believing these silly myths, as it were? Like, I'm not proposing some kind of nihilistic approach of, nothing has any meaning. I'm just saying those things don't have value, is what I get from that. So it's interesting to me that you can read that and that you don't get some kind, and I don't want to use the word conviction, because that's more from your ballpark, right? But that you don't get like a conviction about your faith itself in that moment, where you don't read that out loud and then say, what am I doing believing that a guy walked on water, for instance? Just picking out something, some typical thing that I can point at and say, that sounds silly, or there were two of every kind of animal on the ark during a flood of the whole world, or something like that. It doesn't that kind of just make you question your faith?
Oh, absolutely. Now, what I mean, I think we differ a little bit on the idea of what I would be questioning, but I think the sentiment that Sagan brings forth is that the dot of Earth and all the stuff that's going on our planet is reminding him of something. It's reminding him of, in fact, he goes on to say in other places that shouldn't this vision cause us to treat each other with kindness? Up here in space, 3.7 billion miles away, shouldn't this remind us of what's most important? But what it does, and this is the problem that I think for Carl Sagan and naturalism in general, is that just looking at Earth from a distance doesn't give you any kind of moral groundwork or framework to say what human beings are. In other words, you can look at this and you can say we're small on a purely empirical level. The picture reveals that we're very small in the cosmic scheme of things. But it doesn't give you, it's the is-ought fallacy, that from this, we ought to do this. But the Earth itself, the cosmos itself, doesn't give you the ought, doesn't give you what you should do. So, but what is interesting to me, and this is what I think, it reminds Sagan of the very same thing that it reminded David of in Psalm 8. What is man? And now, of course, David is thinking from the perspective of knowing God. What is man that you're mindful of him? who is man that God would take notice of us?
You're drawing a correlation between David and from Psalms.
Yeah, you want me to read that real quickly?
Carl Sagan, is that right?
Yes. I know that seems kind of silly to you, right?
It sounds a little wacky, but I'm
okay.
all ears.
That's all right. Well, you remember the resurrection in Luke 24 sounded wacky to the disciples. When the woman first told the disciples that Jesus had risen, their first reaction was they thought it was nonsense. So,
as I think they should have. Because people don't come back from the dead.
I mean, that was the first time they'd ever heard anybody coming back from the dead, so it sounded like nonsense to them. You remember when God came to Abraham and Sarah and said that they were going to have a child in their elder years? What was Sarah's reaction? She laughed. And God says, "Why are you laughing?" You know, so God's people, God doesn't choose people that are going to go, okay, you think that God would choose people that would instantly agree with him all the time, but no, you have Job, you have the disciples, you have Sarah laughing at the Lord, so there isn't a level of absurdity that when God comes and speaks to a person, it's going to resonate, it's going to seem crazy. Absolutely. Here's what David says in Psalm 8. He says, "O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is thy name in all the earth, who has displayed thy splendor above the heavens. From the mouths of infants and nursing babes, thou hast established strength because of thine adversaries, to make the enemy and avenger cease. When I consider the heavens, thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man, that thou dost take thought of him, and the son of man, that thou dost care for him?" And that's David's reflection. So he too is looking at the cosmos and coming up, and the universe reminds him that there's something else, there's something more. And of course for David it's God. Why, God, would you create such a vast thing as the cosmos and come down into our little world and care for us? That's David's question.
That is a cool correlation.
Yeah.
I love that. I wasn't familiar with that passage.
And so there's another one, and this, I don't want to go too crazy with it, but there's another one that's similar to this.
Because an atheist podcast loves listening to Bible reading, especially Old Testament Bible reading.
I can stop if you want.
No, I'm okay with you.
All right, so
it gives me more time to eat this pie.
That's what I'm trying to do.
This is delicious.
I'm trying to give you the time to consume that. So Psalm 19 says that the heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, there are no words, their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out throughout all the earth. So in other words, what that's saying is that everybody knows what the universe is. Everybody understands that the universe, the stars, the sun, and the moon. So what did David say? He said that the heavens were the work of God's fingers. Here he's saying that they are the work of his hands. And in Isaiah, the Bible talks about God stretching out the universe like a tent to dwell in. So what I think Sagan has touched upon, and though I know he denies it, what I think he's touched upon, that beauty, that wonder, the awe, the spectacle that the pale blue dot is, has touched the glory of God, is what he is touching on. The universe reminds him of something far greater and far more important. He is reminiscing about man's place in the cosmos, and he's stunned. I mean, Sagan was always a matter of, he was always awed by what he did. He loved what he did. He thought that the universe should engender awe in people. And I think that awe and wonder is part of what the Bible calls the glory of God. So he's touched on it, though I know he denies it and wouldn't acknowledge that. But I think what David and Carl are both looking at is really the glory of God, though Carl doesn't acknowledge it. So that's why he thinks about mankind.
Okay, so all in wonder, I'm with you. I'm wondering, though, okay, say we're not in a coffee shop. Let's say we're watching a sunset or something, right? Something beautiful together. Just two guys watching a sunset holding hands. Who knows? So, in this scenario...
Is that how this is going to go?
This I don't know if you knew that's what was going to happen.
No, you didn't tell me
it's going to get very intimate.
Okay.
So, see a condo in our future. This is working out. Anyway, all right, so we're sitting there, we're watching something in nature, and it's beautiful, okay, whatever it is.
Right.
Doesn't have to be gay. And then I see that, and I think, I still get the awe and wonder that you do, right? But I think, wow, this makes me feel just infinitesimally small. This makes me realize that there is something greater than myself in the sense of nature, in the sense of the sun burning, billions of light years away, right?
Right.
And that's what I get from that. And it's still all in wonder, but you get glory of God. Mm-hmm. And whenever I hear you say that, I think, and no offense, but that is so short-sighted. Like you're taking all of this and just going, God did it. I'm going to think of one singular reference for this whole thing. You know, like to me, that when I was a Christian, I didn't get to appreciate reality as much as I did after I gave up my faith. It wasn't as beautiful to me. It was all explained already. There was no mystery. There was no intrigue to it. Anytime I wanted to know the answer to something, yeah, I could go to school, or I could look up in a science journal or what have you, just like anybody else could. But I didn't have to, because I already had the answers. I knew, because God's word said, this is what happened. I knew everything I needed to know about the beginning, where I was going to end up. If somebody wasn't a Christian, they were going to hell. I was going to heaven. I knew which of my relatives I'd see again. Like, everything just made sense, and it was simple, and it wasn't extravagant. It wasn't beautiful. This life was like a stepping stone for eternity.
I understand.
Whereas now that I'm an atheist, I feel like this life, this is it, man. This is my one shot. And it makes sunsets more beautiful. It makes pie taste better to me. Maybe I'm being a little hyperbolic, but I'm just saying, this pie would have been good either way. But now that I'm going to hell, I gotta enjoy it while I can.
I hope not.
But really, like, you see what I'm saying? Like, and I think that comes full circle, like, to the Carl Sagan reference or your Psalms reference. Can you imagine a scenario where this reality could be more beautiful without your belief? Is that something that you could?
Well, I think what you're wrestling with is something that I also wrestled with in my. I've been a believer now for almost 25 years, and early on in my faith, I experienced something to what you're describing, in terms of the creation, if you will, the physical world, the universe, the heavens and the earth, as something temporal, as something that, okay, it's going to burn up, it's going to be dissolved, God's going to, do away with it. I had a very stunted idea of natural theology. I really didn't even know what natural theology was until about 20 years into my, in the last 5 or 6 years.
What is natural theology?
Natural theology is the tradition of looking at the physical world from the perspective of God existing. So
it's like God and science together.
Yeah, it's
theology is like looking at nature with theology.
Right. So take like Galileo. Okay, Galileo in 1606 pointed his telescope at Jupiter and saw he called them stars, but we now know them to be moons, and he noticed that they moved around the planet. And the exploration of the cosmos from the minds of those men was the presumption of the universe would be orderly and therefore worth studying because it is the design of God himself. And so we would expect to find things, like when you Christmas morning, your parents have arranged all of the presents and everything, and you come up Christmas morning, you expect to find things because your mom and dad are behind it, or Santa, or however you want to look at it. So the early, so if you go from Copernicus, I say 1543 is when he died. If you go from Copernicus onward, you have this assumption that God is the creator, and thus the creation would be orderly and worth investigating. So the idea that you see the order in the planets, you see the order in the stars, you see the order in nature, you see the rhythm and the patterns and things, and you assume, so natural theology doesn't get you to Jesus of the Bible, of course. It just looks principally at these things, but the early scientists took for granted that God designed it, and that's what launched the exploration of it. I have a quote from Copernicus. It kind of goes along with what you're asking.
Yeah, hit me.
Now, you know what he's famous for, right?
Lead singer of Aerosmith.
Copernicus? No, that's Steven Tyler.
Oh, okay.
I don't think he discovered anything in the heavens. I'm not sure. He was very reluctant to publish his ideas because he was afraid of being ridiculed. Now, what were his ideas? Let me read you this. He wrote to the Pope because people were persuading him. He says, "Hey, Nicholas, you need to publish this." He's like, "Well," and so here's what he writes to the Pope. "I may well presume, most holy Father, that certain people as soon as they hear that in this book about the revolutions, that's his book he's talking about, of the spheres of the universe, I ascribe moment to the earthly globe, will cry out that holding such views, I should at once be hissed off the stage. So in other words, he's reluctant to publish that the earth is moving because he's afraid people are going to make fun of him. So,
which would be,
I mean, if you think about this, this is 1500s. This is a couple decades after the Reformation. Even Martin Luther thought Copernicus was nuts. He's basically the first guy in Western scientific history to suggest full scale that the earth is moving. I mean, you go outside, you stand still. Copernicus, come on, is the Earth moving? It takes a lot of guts to say.
Doesn't feel like it.
Doesn't feel like it.
It's not intuitive to us.
No, it's not. So what I'm saying there is it's a counterintuitive presupposition about the nature of the universe. And Copernicus wasn't. He didn't. Of course, this was before telescopes, because he didn't have a telescope. He didn't have very many astronomical tools. He actually was borrowing a lot from Ptolemy, the 2nd century astronomer at Alexandria. So he didn't do a lot of observations either. He just says, there was a guy in ancient Greece, Aristarchus, who first proposed a heliocentric model of our solar system, but it was ignored for whatever reason. I don't really know why. But Copernicus really was going out on a limb, and he was a timid guy, and he didn't want to make waves, and he was just, if the Earth moved, it would upset the Aristotelian cosmology that had been in place for about 1,800 years up until that point. So here's the first guy going against 1,500 years of assumed science. It's not just the church. This is just scientific theory. The crystal spheres, the Earth at the center, unmovable.
You would say scientific theory controlled by the church, though.
Well, I mean, that was the culture. That was
the way that they understood the Bible at the time, that was what they believed. It would be blasphemy. It would be almost against the Bible, because they believed the Bible said that we were the center of the universe.
Yeah, the ascription that the Earth was at the center, and in the medieval cosmology, as we know it, at each of the spheres there was a crystal sphere. Dante's, Paradiso, Dante's comedy is the height of medieval. I would say the height of the medieval mind in terms of what the cosmos was like.
I feel like, just to interject, I feel like with your whole discussion here, though, you're almost leaving out the most important part of this whole thing, and that is that
don't let me.
Religion was stifling science all along, which I think is analogous to my whole point of once I let go of religion, things became much more fascinating.
Well, I don't.
The answers were available now because I was starting to finally ask the right questions. And whenever you're going through this whole this history of how we understood heliocentrism and this sort of thing, I'm sure you're about to go to Galileo here shortly, which same story with Galileo, right? Where the church was forcing him to recant his confirmation of heliocentrism.
There's a good story about Galileo and the Pope at the time. Very good story.
Well, yeah,
but I know what you're saying.
I feel like everything that you're saying is so weird to me, because here we are. It's almost like that. Here we go again. You read Pale Blue Dot, and I say, how do you see this and not feel a certain intellectual guilt, as it were, about your beliefs?
Okay, well, let me ask you this.
And then same thing with Copernicus. How do you see how the church has stifled science and not feel some kind of intellectual guilt about it?
Well, let me ask you this. By looking, so I looked at, you just we just saw the picture of it. What you're saying I should feel guilty by looking at from the Pale Blue Dot, from that, how?
Yeah, guilt's a bad word.
Okay.
I shouldn't
what do you
guilt,
think,
but
honest question, what do you think I should be thinking about, I see that for the first time, what should I think about that?
Your question is actually very telling, because you're right. Guilt, shoulds,
it doesn't come from the picture.
I have no right to put that on you. I guess the better phrasing would be, if I were in your shoes and I see that, I think that I would say, why am I investing my time in some sort of faith-based system whenever I can look at the Pale Blue Dot, or I can see a scientific history with Copernicus and Galileo, and I can see how all these different people have had faith-based systems all this time, right? There's a million of them, okay, throughout history. There's probably, what is it, like 30,000? I think it's closer to 3,000, isn't it? That are in existence right now. And obviously, we could just name the top most popular, but they're all three Abrahamic, right?
Yeah.
And they all disagree with each other. They all have a different answer. They all have a different way of living life. They all have they're all in conflict with one another. They can't all be right. They can't all be wrong. And when I see that pale blue dot, or whenever I hear what the church has done to science, that at that one moment right there, I don't. What should you be feeling?
Or but what's the proper approach?
You should be angry, Dan.
Angry?
You should be angry. You should be furious at that book that you're holding, and how it is taking away the beauty of the world. How it has held back science all this time. How it has had a negative impact on our I don't want to say our culture, because culture is not really a moral thing. Culture has mostly been defined through Christianity, right? But at least how it's had a negative impact on human flourishing and happiness. I don't know how you don't get that. How you and I, once again, we're both sitting there looking at the sunset, and we get two totally different things. And I think that's one of the major reasons that I do this show. Is like, part of me wants to understand where you're coming from, because I can tell you that whenever I was in your shoes, when I was a believer, I never thought about this stuff this way.
That's why, I can totally understand why it's a conflict and a struggle for you, because you didn't develop it as a believer. I totally agree. For the first half of my Christian life, I didn't really have a developed understanding of creation myself, and it didn't seem like it mattered to me. And I think, Robert, now what you're looking at in our culture today, I've spent the last 3 years studying cosmology, formally, through my master's degree. It was part of it, the intersection of cosmology, culture, and literature. And my research has gained me a friend at the Hubble Space Telescope.
Cool.
Yeah, he came to Houston a couple of years ago to speak. And I said, he has a public email, and so I said, I'll shoot him an email and just say, I'm coming down from Dallas to hear you speak. I love Hubble stuff. And he graciously replied. We met after the conversation. He had a wonderful presentation, and I didn't really get a chance to talk to him because he was cornered by an atheist after we were having tea and cookies in the reception area, and he was surrounded by a circle of 20 or 30
people. That's what
people.
You do at the Hubble telescope, have tea and cookies. That's appropriate.
He's amazing, man. And so this guy is just going on and about how can a Christian be a Hubble Space Telescope scientist. Anton was so patient with him for about 20 or 30 minutes. The guy just one after the other, and Anton really couldn't get a word in edgewise. And I briefly told him who I was, but he had to go. He was already late. And he says, well, Daniel, we'll stay in touch. And I said, right, yeah, Hubble Space Telescope scientist is going to stay in touch with me. Yeah, right.
He's just saying that, right?
Yeah, he's just saying that. But no, for the last 2 years, for about once every month or two, I get an email from Anton asking me how I'm doing.
That's so cool.
It is. And he is, just to tell you who he is, have you seen pictures of the Hubble Ultra Deep Field?
No.
Okay, the Hubble Ultra Deep Field came out in 2004. And basically it consisted of Hubble going around the Earth over 400 times. Hubble circles the Earth at about 300 miles up every 90 minutes. So they meticulously aimed at a patch of sky no bigger than a grain of sand held out at arm's length. So if you go out at night tonight, take a piece of sand in your fingers, hold it out at arm's length. That's the square space of sky that Hubble took a picture of.
Oh, is this the one that they can see all the different galaxies?
Yes.
Okay.
So 400 orbits, different exposures, 2 exposures per orbit. So they would have like 20 or 30 or 40 minute exposures, 2 different exposures. It was on the advanced camera for surveys, I believe. And so they did this 400 times over the course of months. And so Anton's job was to examine every one of those images and produce the public release. So he was the he led the imaging team. So any public release of NASA imagery from Hubble, it goes through Anton's desk. So he's got a meticulous eye for this, and there's a reason I'm getting to this. But he put this together. So the ultra deep field is 10,000 galaxies in that tiny little space of sand. 10,000 galaxies. They redid it in 2012. They added more light from different wavelengths because the technology had improved. So 2004 it came out, 2012, and then 2014. 12 different wavelengths of light. This thing is like the king's jewels on black velvet. It's amazing. And so that was Anton's, that's his primary work. It was the deepest view into the universe. So what am I getting at? Well, Anton is a believer. He's been at Hubble for nearly 20 years. And he has given talks on how he reconciles his Christian faith with, I mean, that's cutting edge astrophysicists. You know, he's not a dummy. But he says this. And I love this quote. He says, just contemplating the sheer scale of the universe, as well as the beauty revealed in all our astronomical images, can leave anyone with a profound sense of awe and wonder, like we talked about, regardless of one's perspective on religion. From my own personal viewpoint as a Christian, I would say that we can appreciate even more deeply how the writers of Scripture were inspired thousands of years ago to write, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim his handiwork." So he's perfectly at peace and at ease with cutting-edge astrophysics and ancient Scripture. He makes a wonderful case for it. And I think it's compelling because here's a man who is at the top of his game in terms of the science of the universe. And he is also a faithful believer who sees no conflict between the two. So I don't think that it's necessarily fair to say that science is always being blocked by religious faith. I think it's actually kind of the other way around now, is that it's harder and harder to be a faithful believer in the realm of an increasingly secular scientific community. That certainly is a challenge today. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that there's a lot of scientists that work in a lot of different areas, but I think that's the challenge today. Anton is always clear to say this is my personal viewpoint. He doesn't get it mixed up with what he does at the Space Telescope Institute. But I think it's perfectly reasonable. And with Galileo, that's like the sore thumb that sticks out anytime you're talking about the history of the church and science. Galileo, the Pope, I forgot what his name was before he was Pope, but he and Galileo, Pope Bob, it might have been. I'm sorry, I don't know. I could be
wrong. I don't know.
Before that man became Pope, he was Galileo's benefactor. So back then he was a patron of Galileo. So he was paying Galileo to be able to do scientific research, what you would call it. Yeah. So he was a benefactor. He became Pope. And then the relationship dynamic between the two men changed. Now I'm in charge of the church, and I have to kind of take this line that's a little different from you, Brother Galileo. So there was this. They were both kind of intemperate men. They were both a little hard-headed, both a little stubborn, both a little, this is the way it is. Of course, Galileo conceded to house arrest, but there was a lot of personal fisticuffs behind that relationship early on that sometimes it doesn't get mentioned, but if you go back into the deeper history of things, you can see that exists. So I think there's always an antagonism, Robert. I think I would agree with you that there's always been conflicts between what we call science today and what we traditionally understand as Christianity. So yeah, I don't deny the conflict, but I think what, for me, in the last 10 years, has been to really examine the universe and the creation in light of who Christ is, and really take Scripture and science seriously. I've read Lawrence Krauss. I've read Neil deGrasse Tyson. I spent a couple of years going through a lot of the atheist literature to see Carl Sagan was what got me interested, was who got me interested in the universe. So I'm very familiar with Sagan's writings. And so that's where the more I studied it, the more I saw Sagan was actually kind of running a parallel track with David, although going in the other direction in terms of the awe and wonder and things like that. So
do you think...
Sorry for going so long.
No, not at all. I think this is your method, is you bring pie, and then the person you're talking to
lets me talk. I've been accused of that.
While you get to talk. No, I'm kidding. No, it's actually delicious. You said there was lemon peel?
Lemon peel, nutmeg, cinnamon, sugar, butter, shortening, and Granny Smith apples.
Oh my God.
2.5 pounds of Granny Smiths.
That is delicious.
Peeled, cut by hand.
Okay, so you would admit that during the time of Copernicus and Galileo, that the church, and I understand you're a Protestant believer, so whenever we're referencing the church, we're not necessarily referencing your particular faith.
Sure.
But, well, you'll go to heaven with Catholics, right? Just as a side note.
I think so. I have lots of Catholic friends.
I know a lot of Protestants that are like, no Catholics in heaven. They all go to hell with atheists. I don't know.
I can't do that.
How about Jews? Do they get to go to heaven? They don't accept Christ dying.
No, but
or
Scripture does talk about, and I think it's in Romans, God grafting back in the Jewish people back into the faith. So
that'd be a nice thing to do.
Yeah, I think they will, and I think it's Romans 9 talking about, hey, you Gentiles, you were grafted in. God grafted you in as a wild shoot. Don't be prideful like, I believe and the Jews don't, because God is able to graft the Jews back in, which I think He will. I think there is still legitimacy in the Jewish faith, that God is still working through those people to bring Him back to Himself.
It's messed up for them to be like His special people for like what, the last, I don't know if you're a young Earth creationist, but let's just say the last 8,000 years at least, right? They were like His special people, and now they're just screwed. Like ever since Jesus came, like it totally just screwed the Jews over, right?
They rejected Christ, and well, we all do, but so God uses their rejection as a means and goes to the Gentiles to sort of make the Jewish people jealous.
He sold them out. That's what I see.
Well, it's part of the mind of God that I don't have. Why did He do it this way? I don't know. Why these people? I don't know. Why did He pick me? I don't know. So He's working. I think there's still salvation coming for Jewish people. I do.
I totally got off track. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
So back to science here. There was things that the church believed about science based on the Bible, right? And they were wrong. Like heliocentrism.
Well, when you say based on the Bible, a lot
based
of it,
on their understanding of the Bible.
There you go. Yeah,
okay, fair enough.
Totally agree.
That's what I meant, but I appreciate your correction. So, would you say that there are things that you understand about the Bible now that will be proven wrong by science later? Would you have the same kind of humility that we would say they should have had then if they were intellectually honest?
Sure.
Could you have that now and go, maybe I'm wrong about, I don't know, what's something?
Well, I know you've had many podcasts about natural selection. I'm not an expert on that. I do have a couple of fundamental things that I struggle with natural selection. I am Earth age, universe age agnostic. I think I don't hold to a definite number. I certainly, talking to Anton, I certainly know that light distance is a problem for if you're going to be a young Earth.
I was going to ask you that about Hubble guy.
Yeah.
With like, how did he explain the light getting here?
I don't know what his, obviously, given where he is, I assume he believes in an old universe. I've never asked him specifically about that, but he's so congenial and so ecumenical that it's not for what the level of science that he does. It's not an issue that he brings up necessarily in talks. I used to be hardcore, but about young Earth. But the Bible doesn't give us an age, and I'm not going to argue with my brethren about how old the Earth is if the Bible... It's a non-essential to me. So science is always progressing and always learning and growing. But to your question, is there something that I would hold with an open hand? Of course, because here's kind of my general sense of this. When we're talking about science, we go back to Aristotle, the tradition, starting in the Western tradition, the Greeks, the Aristotle, and we take our science and call it science from Aristotle till now. It's 2,600 years or something like that. And we compare all of that body of knowledge to Genesis. It's an unfair comparison. Genesis is one page. We have 2,500 years of human beings, recorded human beings' observations of the universe, of the physical world, and it's always constantly changing. The knowledge is always constantly changing. For example, in science, in 1987, a supernova blew up. SN 1987A. Now, what was unique about that supernova, it was a nondescript super blue, a blue supergiant. Blue supergiants up to 1987 did not explode. This one exploded.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and only up until that point, the theory was that only red giants explode. So what was a blue giant doing going supernova? Because as stellar formation theory holds, Blue giants are like the SUVs of the universe. They burn a lot of fuel, and they're done with in 2 years. They're over when done with quick.
That's a cool characterization.
You're in the next
SUVs
model
of the
year.
universe,
They theoretically, they have an intense. They use an intense amount of fuel, and then they don't last very long. But they don't. The idea of stellar evolution suggests that they morph into a red giant after they've burned off all their fuel. They sort of get bigger and bigger, and so only red giants were supposed to go supernova. So that one went supernova in 1987A, and it's the most widely documented supernova in the history of supernovas that we know of. And that was in 1987. There was no Hubble. There was no Chandra X-ray telescope, and there was no large millimeter array in the Atacama Desert in Chile. Hubble came along in 1990, Chandra came along in 1999, and the Atacama Large Millimeter Array in Chile came along in 2011. Now, why do I say all that? Because each one of those uncovered a spectrum of light about the supernova. So Hubble imaged the supernova in visible light. So it's a kind of a green ring. The ALMA has this orange cloud, and then the Chandra X-ray telescope has this beautifully gorgeous neon blue ring. All the same supernova, different wavelengths of light. We now know far more about the supernova than we did in 1987, simply because now we can see the different wavelengths of light. So my analogy there is that, the Bible says that God is light. He created light. He said, "Let there be light." Right? He created the electromagnetic spectrum. If Christianity is true, I'm saying this. So God can use the light he created the light, he created the stars, but he uses it in such a way that we are constantly discovering about it. Modern physics in the last century, light is a particle and a wave. That's still a tremendous and wonderful mystery that invites a lot of doctoral theses to explore, particles and waves and quarks and protons and neutrons. The more we know, for everything that we do know, there's so much more questions that come up. And so for me, my natural theology is that God he's constantly giving us gifts. He's constantly hiding things so that we may discover them. It's like Christmas. So my knowledge of God is going to change in 10 years. My knowledge of the universe is going
like Christmas.
Yeah, it is. The proverb says that it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, and it is the glory of kings to find it out. And so there's this, God delights in making things for us to discover. And so my knowledge of him will increase over the next several years as I mature, and our science's knowledge of the physical world is going to change. So I have no problem in admitting I don't know, and fully holding with an open hand that I could be wrong, or science could be wrong, or I'm fallible and my knowledge is constantly changing. So I'm comfortable with the unknown, but I don't think that our science has disproven God, if you will. I don't take that route.
Okay, so if there's something in the Bible that you could say you would be open to changing your interpretation of.
Yeah, in fact, I was on Dogma Debate, the last show. I was wrong about something, and I went back, and I go back and listen to myself.
That's cool that you'd say that.
Yeah, I go back and I listen to myself, and I'm speaking off the cuff a lot of times, and I made a point about Matthew 10:34 with David. Oh, I didn't come to bring peace, I came to bring division or a sword.
Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah, and so I said something about, the Greek word for peace was a temporal sort of worldly peace. Well,
that's right, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't. It's the same peace that's in John 14:27.
I just took your word for it.
Well, see, and I emailed David and I told him I was wrong. I always do this. I mean, I go back and I say, did I say something stupid or foolish or ignorant or just talking off the top of my head? I went back to that one because I knew at that moment.
That's cool. That's integrity, man. That's a character move.
So, I went back, and what I discovered was I dug into the topic a little bit more, and realized, I don't know if you saw he has a video where he was at a recent atheist conference where he does a thing with the crowd, and he asks people to get up and go over here if you did this, and get up and go over there if you do believe in this.
No, tell me about it.
I think it's, I don't want to put, I don't know enough. I think it was at the Gateway to Reason recently. It was a recent one this past summer or early fall. And he was saying, okay, everybody that, likes green cheese, go over there. Everybody that likes voted for Hillary, go over there, and whatever, And so the room at some point
divides everybody up into
everybody's
two sections?
divided. No, there's like
Or
five or multiple sections
Okay.
because he wanted to prove the point that look how divided we are about these things.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes on and he lists all the important things that he thinks that are important to the humanist.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and so what I shared with him, I said, David,
we're all really united about these things.
Yeah, so what Jesus is saying is actually exactly what David did. David didn't come into that room to divide people. That wasn't the final goal. He divided them initially so that he could show them, look how divided we are, but look at what we should be united about. And then
that's what Jesus was doing.
That's what I think the bringing division was about. So I'm going to bring division first with the ultimate goal of bringing peace. So that's what
the exact opposite of how I would interpret it.
Yeah. Well, but
once again, we're back to the pale blue dot, how we read the Bible. I don't. Okay. I don't want to get off on that again.
No, that's
because
okay.
I felt like you answered that very well. I expressed how I can look at the same thing you look at and get a different interpretation of it. And then you explained how you get yours, and you even used an example of your friend from the Hubble telescope research and how he's a Christian. So I feel like you answered that as much as you can, and I answered my end as much as I could. And I would love if there was a way that we could explain how we both can see something different. Even, you know what I mean? Like, you explained how you saw it, I explained how I saw it, but why don't we see the same thing? I don't know that we're going to be able to solve that in a coffee shop. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. But the point I was wanting to get to is, if you can say that something in the Bible is something that you could change your mind about, at least in terms of your interpretation of what's in the Bible, could you do that with the gospel?
You mean, are you saying
that part of the Bible that talks about death, burial, resurrection? Could that part, the foundation of your faith, right? You would say the gospel.
Yes.
I would think Genesis would be that, because without Genesis, there's no point in Christ. Without the fall,
it's a foundation.
But I see here. Could the gospel have something about it?
Okay.
That could be proven wrong to you.
Okay, so you're saying that if there was some kind of evidence that would reveal that Jesus didn't resurrect, we would be very specific.
Sure, or maybe through Bible study, you found out that it wouldn't even have to be that large. Like
okay,
but in the same area. Anything that one says. That Jesus didn't resurrect at all from some kind of scientific, historical thing. But that's a perfect example you brought up. Or maybe just in Bible study, you and a fellow Christian both still believe that, death, burial, resurrection perhaps, but that a different number of people came to the tomb, for instance. Or maybe Barabbas. Was it Barabbas? Is that who I'm thinking of, the guy that betrayed him?
Judas.
Which one was Barabbas?
Barabbas was the guy that, he was the thief that they wanted to release. Pilate was asking which of the criminals that did the crowd want him to release to them.
Yeah,
and Barabbas was a thief, and they wanted Jesus crucified, so they said,
who's
release
the guy in the tree? Come down here. Zacchaeus.
I don't
know why I was thinking of Zacchaeus. Okay, anyway, all right, so Judas didn't die from landing in, falling down and guts burst, but he died from hanging or something like that. Just minor differences. In that same way, could you change your mind about the gospel? Could you be wrong about something from the gospel itself?
I certainly could be wrong. I will say that. I don't think the gospel accounts are contradictory, but I'm willing to. So when you bring that up, you have to talk through those things specifically. Like, let's just take Luke 24, I think it's 10 and 11. The first account of the resurrection is told by the women that went to the tomb. They are told by Jesus to go and tell the disciples. They go to the disciples, the authorities. These are going to be the foundational authorities of Christianity going forward. And their first response to the resurrection, at least to what the ladies had said, was it was ridiculous. They were completely... Now, if I'm writing a fictional narrative about trying to establish my particular brand of orthodoxy, I'm not going to have my leadership be equivocating on the fundamental hope of this whole religious system. So the idea that the apostles thought that the women's testimony about Jesus' resurrection was nuts was actually recorded is either a stroke of fictional genius or that I think it really happened. But I say that, Robert, to say that I think it really did happen, and I think the disciples really did think that the resurrection, the idea that their teacher, their rabbi, was dead and that he was alive again, was completely nonsensical. And I think that, and you look at the disciples after Jesus died, what did they go? Peter went back to fishing. They went back to Galilee, and Jesus has to come to them and call them back. But they gave up on it. You know, the disciples on the Emmaus Road. The story is wonderful because one of them says to Jesus, "Don't you know what happened in Jerusalem this weekend?" "No, tell me what things." You know, and he doesn't even recognize who Jesus is. And they think, and in their retelling of the story, they're telling it as though they were hoping Jesus to be some kind of king that would overthrow Caesar and release the Jews from their Roman bondage. That didn't happen. So Jesus comes down and enters into the world in a way that not even his own students recognized, even as it was happening. So there's that essence. I say all that to say that I am just as fallible human being in my ignorance as they were, and they were there. And you know, here I am, 2,000 years removed. I certainly don't have the final exegetic. I'm not done reading the Gospels. I'm not done studying the Gospels. I'm not done learning about them. I have to learn and relearn and read and reread because I forget. You know, the older we get, the easier we forget. So yeah, I'm totally willing to have discussions to talk about those things that people think might be problematic and hear the claims that are put forth if somebody believes the scriptures are in error. Yeah, I'm open to that. I didn't used to be. But I certainly am open to the discussion and hearing the case for and against. Absolutely. That's how these meaningful discussions progress. I think that's where you make it.
Would that not make you, if you could admit that you could be wrong about the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, and that he's the incarnate God, would that not make you agnostic in the same sense that I'm agnostic?
No, I don't.
Because I could be wrong about it as well.
Yeah, I'm.
But if we can both admit we're wrong, doesn't that put us in the same ballpark of saying that we don't have absolute certainty?
Well, I guess so we're talking about certainty, whether or not we're certain about something?
I see your point. Perhaps conflating those two things is something.
Yeah, because I see
that we're not necessarily talking. Okay, let's address all three. There's claiming knowledge of, but not necessarily certain. There's belief, which we would definitely disagree on belief. And then there's certainty. So we can agree on the certainty. Neither of us are certain that Jesus is Lord, right?
Well, I'm certain about it, but I certainly could be wrong. But I'm so I don't want to get into numbers and confidence, but I'm confident it's true.
You don't want to go Blake Juta here.
I'm confident that it's true. But so you pick those three things. So if I don't think there's any avoiding certainty. At some point, you have to be certain. There's a certain kind of epistemic certitude at the base root of your belief system, whatever your epistemology is, philosophically or religiously. There has got to begin a point where you have to be certain about at least one thing, even if it's certainty about being uncertain. There is a level of certainty somewhere in one's epistemology that is unavoidable. It may be different for different people, but you have to have that bedrock, this is just bare bones true,
and I go one thing that you're certain about?
Yeah, so take certainty, what you're saying, that you're uncertain. Are you certain about being uncertain? See, there's
I don't know.
There's not an infinite regress. You have to have a certitude about something. So if you think, for example, agnosticism.
That's like the Matt Slick thing, where you say, there is no absolute truth,
which is an absolute. Yeah,
I see your point.
It's an epistemic claim that I'm making.
Wouldn't the answer there be, I don't know? If you say, are you certain that there's no certainty?
That's what I mean.
And I say, I'm not certain of that either. Well, I could be.
But then you fall into an infinite regress of agnosticism. You are certain about.
Wouldn't that be the most honest approach to?
I don't
reality.
See why would it be the most honest?
Because I'm experiencing this subjectively.
Right. So we all are.
I would then look at this and say, I don't know for sure. I'm not a brain in a vat. To do the Psi 10 Frugenkate thing, right?
But you're demanding of you. Your position is kind of, in a way, though it's subtle, is demanding of everybody else to be. Is saying that the most honest position is agnosticism, therefore you should be agnostic, is just as much of a narrow truth claim as me saying Jesus is Lord.
I don't understand how they're equivalent.
Well, if you're saying that the best position...
I can't be wrong in this premise.
The premise of certainty or uncertainty?
The premise of uncertainty. I can't be wrong.
Well, yeah,
that.
if you... Okay, so we're getting into...
You could be wrong with yours. So immediately, one of these has less...
But you're starting from a premise of, I wouldn't necessarily say doubt, but if you're doubting or being skeptical or being open-minded, what that presumes is that you have something by which to be skeptical, a measuring line by which to be skeptical. So I just made you pie. If you want to say that that's the best pie you've ever had, then that's your measuring rod for all other pies that you've ever tasted. And so when you're talking about truth claims...
How did I know pie was going to be an analogy for something?
It's helpful. But
I figured it would be like in the division of the pie and how we divide the...
In terms of a truth claim, here's what I'm hearing that claim to be. Agnosticism is the only honest way to go, is a claim toward truth. So you're presuming that this is the way to begin
epistemically.
That is the
only honest way that is feasible to us. Yes.
Yeah. So that's a narrow. That's a claim.
Now, if you had special knowledge, okay, like if you actually did have the Holy Spirit, right?
I hope I do.
So if you had divine revelation, for instance, then you would be in a class separate from the rest of us. And at that point, I think it would be fair for you to say, I have a reason to be certain about something more than everyone else. But since we are all in this boat together, as it were.
Yeah, the subjects of people. Absolutely.
I don't see any other rational way of viewing reality.
Well, there you go. What is
lack of certainty?
But what is the reality there? That's kind of an assumed term that gets into the conversation without sometimes being defined clearly. So you're beginning with a premise of what reality is and
what
going
is
from there.
Reality?
Yeah, so for your claim, and I totally understand what you're saying. So agnosticism, given reality, agnosticism seems to be the only honest way forward in understanding what reality is. But that begins with an idea of what reality is initially.
Can I make an objection here?
Absolutely.
And before I do, I want to do a little prerequisite that I love this conversation. I love the conversation we're having, just you and I in this coffee shop right now. But even more so, I love the topic that we're discussing.
It's fun. It's meaningful.
Yeah, of epistemology and what is reality and ontological nature of what have you. Okay, I love this stuff. But my objection that I feel is only fair to bring up is every time I have a discussion with a believer and we get into faith or whether the Bible's true or not. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, this doesn't usually come up with like evolution stuff per se, like creationism, evolution. But if the Bible's true or not, it always reduces down to now we have to question reality itself, or now we have to explain reality itself.
That's what science is. Don't you think?
Perhaps.
So you have science.
You see my point, though, that it's almost like in order for us to even be able to question the validity of this thing, we have to question everything.
Well,
and we don't do that with other topics, do we? I mean, if you said you made an apple pie and I said it was a cherry pie, we wouldn't redefine reality.
No.
You know? Or we wouldn't have to define reality, I guess, because I'm not saying you're trying to redefine it. I'm just saying.
No.
So I'm just a side point.
I understand completely what you're getting at.
It's almost like, as much as I do enjoy it, it's almost like whenever it happens, I'm like, oh, come on. We got to talk about what is reality just to, like. Well,
I think what I was getting at.
I feel a little cynicism, I guess. Is
I
the
do.
Way to,
I understand. I think all I mean to get at, Robert, is let's just take a very simple concept about reality and where we differ. The world was created. The world wasn't created. That's a fundamental reality for both of us. Okay. And that's what I'm saying. That in a non-created world, you come at a different kind of epistemic. In a created world, I come at it from a different kind of epistemic. So I'm not asking to redefine pies. I'm just saying that at the foundational level, your reality is not created. Mine is, in terms of divinely created.
So if we're going to find common ground, because that's the whole goal here, is for us to find common ground. If we go all the way back to the way that you said it, this is creation or this is not creation.
Yeah.
If we're going to find common ground, we got to go before that, right? We have to go back. We have to go more fundamental than whether or not this is create. Like, for you and I to find our common ground and then work from there, we got to keep digging that hole deeper and deeper. So we'll start with, kind of beautiful the way this conversation's progressed. Starting with something that we're both familiar with, right? Pale blue dot. We see this differently, all right? So let's back off from there. You go to Scripture. We both interpret this differently. Then we back off from there. We went to, where we go after that? Heliocentrism. We see the church's influence on science differently, all right? Now we're even going back in time as far as science is concerned, right? And now we're talking about creation itself. We're going to have to go back before, not necessarily before chronologically, but dig this hole even deeper to something more fundamental that we can agree on.
Quarks?
I don't know if we have to. It doesn't. I don't think it has to be matter. I think it has to reduce to logic.
Okay, yeah, that's that.
Right?
Right.
Like,
so,
I don't actually have a way I'm trying to lead this conversation.
I know
I'm
what
just
you're saying,
like,
though.
if we can't agree on, I guess, if we're going to call it creation or not creation, that's reality. We have to go deeper
physical
than reality.
world.
We have to go into logical absolutes.
So
we could agree there are logical absolutes.
Sure,
right?
So our differences again come from the origins of those logical absolutes. For you in naturalism, I'm assuming you're metaphysical naturalist.
Yeah. That would
so your logic,
as long as we distinguish between philosophical naturalism.
right? So bare bones, if the physical world is it, if we want to go there, then you have your apologetic would be to go from how two up quarks and a down quark make a neutron, or no, a proton, and how two down quarks and an up quark make a neutron, and explain how sentient logical absolutes come out of that compendium of subatomic particles. That's the burden of naturalism as I see it. Maybe not.
There is no way I could explain intelligent life from quarks, no.
But that's the compendium
Maybe
that is
one
offered.
day.
But that's
Maybe one day we will.
But that's the Big Bang. I mean, this is Lawrence Krauss, it's Neil deGrasse Tyson, it's Sean Carroll, it's Carl Sagan. They go back to the infinitesimally small physicality of the beginning of our world and extrapolate forward to human sentience. That's
as much as I would have a hard time with abiogenesis, wouldn't you have a hard time with where did God come from, though?
no.
I mean, I know that's very cliche to
No,
bring up,
not
but
at all.
It seems appropriate at this moment.
I do understand the burden, because I think whether you're a naturalist or a theist, I think the necessity comes out of the conversation is that you have to deal in eternalities when you're talking about the universe, or at least infinites, because Brian Greene, Max Tegmark, Sean Carroll, not so much Sean Carroll anymore, but the idea of a regressive set of infinites, or an infinite multiverse, or an infinite universe. You are dealing in infinities or eternality when you try to go back to the very beginnings of things. So even for the naturalist, you need at least you need some kind of infinity to explain the universe. Either it's always been here, like Carl Sagan said.
I'm comfortable with infinity.
Yeah. So
well, I don't think anyone's comfortable with the concept of infinity.
No.
But I mean,
But
I don't find that to be a problem for either of us.
Well, for a practical...
That's where we can agree.
Well...
We found somewhere we can start from.
There's a difference between eternality and an infinity. Well, somewhat, but you would both agree that I think that they are both pre-existing.
Well, eternality would just be infinity of time.
Sure, yeah, and not... Well, time is not infinite, because
you can't use time with your...
Well, there's no time. There's timeless. There has to be a timelessness.
Oh, God.
No, seriously, Robert. No,
we were agreeing for a minute.
We were. But the problem with an infinite...
and there has to be a timelessness for you, because if there isn't, then your Bible wouldn't be true.
But you can't have an infinite series of things, though. That in reality, if you had a library filled with infinite number of books, you check one out and it's still an infinite number of books.
Time is simply a measurement, right?
A measurement of a passage, right? Mm-hmm. Moment by moment. A measurement
of how we understand time, space. Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll say it that way.
Motion, matter, and energy.
Fair enough. So, in the same way, inches are just a measurement of how we understand matter.
Right.
From point A to point B, which
Right.
is just a conceptual starting, ending
Well,
point.
and time is the fourth dimension in the height, width, space time
So,
compendium. Yeah.
So we're covering all four here. So whenever we take my latte, my ice, what is it? Iced
latte.
And we take the top of that cup and we look at the circle, right? We can get the measurement of pi,
Yeah.
right? What is it, from the circumference of the circle?
3.14 or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Keep going. 3.14.
Yeah, I don't know. I
can't
don't
do
know.
it. Anyone that can should die. Okay, so, but you take the circumference and I think you divide it by the radius or diameter or something like that, right? Okay. Anyway, it's never ending, right?
Yeah, it's
That's a never ending amount of inches or measurement, depending on how large the circle is.
theoretically, yes.
Okay. So for me, time being looked at in the same way isn't a problem because it's a conceptual way of understanding something in nature,
Sure.
just like our math is a conceptual way of understanding the measurement of infinity of the top of my latte, right? So I don't see why there has to be a limitation on time in that regard.
Well,
I would be comfortable if you said there was a time that time started. It's kind of ironic. What's the word?
a paradox.
Paradox. Thanks. Paradoxical. But still, I'm okay with that, saying that space-time had to originate at some point.
Yeah.
But for it to be impossible that there is an infinity, right, and therefore an infinity of time or eternality, I don't see how that would be.
Well,
a problem outside of the Bible.
Well, if I asked you to go to the Infinite Library and pull out the 17th book from the collection, where would you begin?
It would be relative to whatever we numbered as one.
Well, there's only one shelf.
But isn't that what we do with time itself? I mean,
We have to
where we put AD and BC.
Right.
I mean,
So
these
what
are
you're
just
doing
relative to events.
in order for you to get to the book 17, you have to start at a particular volume. There has to be, so for a number system and for a time system, there has to be a point of origin.
Which we give to the infinity.
Yes,
We give the point of origin.
but the idea that there is one prior to the point of origin is what is theoretical metaphysical, not an actual, in terms of a scientific, actual proven entity. It is a theoretical.
It's arbitrary.
Yeah, it's a subjective,
Like,
theoretical application
Like
of
a border. If you and I are neighbors and I say, well, the fence line that I built the fence, right, and that fence line means that the tree's on my side, so I get the apples off of it and you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, these lines are completely arbitrary, and we just decide what they are. I mean, we can go into the city records and but even those guys made an arbitrary line before us, right? And that's the same thing. So once again, you saying you have to have a starting point. How would you identify number 17? I would say, it doesn't matter. It's whatever we call it.
Well,
as long as we all agree, and that would be the objectivity of.
But the point of that analogy is the starting point, that an infinite set cannot have a beginning. So our universe is not, if our universe had a beginning, it's not infinite. Because we're not talking about something that we can actually conceptualize. You might be able to get down to the very, very small beginning of the universe, but what is prior to that is pure metaphysical, whether it's theology or science or philosophy.
Couldn't it just be another form of reality other than the universe?
So you're willing to posit that?
Sure.
Okay. That's where we can agree upon. There may be something that pre-exists that pre-exists the beginning of our universe, and it seems to be infinite or eternal.
I wouldn't even say that it would be hypothetical. I would say that that's something that we could be nearly certain about.
Okay, we kind of agree that there's something
before the Big Bang.
Something had to be infinite or eternal before the beginning of our universe.
Most likely. The reason that I would be uncertain in any regard, and this would maybe, if we're going to go to the Blake Juta kind of thing, I would be at 1%, right, is simply because if something must come from something, right? It can't come from nothing. And the reason that something can't come from nothing, I think, is because nothing is an unrealistic expectation of reality. So you can't have nothing. What is nothing?
Right.
How do you put something in nothing if nothing couldn't even be a container because it's nothing? You couldn't even have the laws of something must come from nothing.
Right.
So perhaps something can come from nothing in that regard, because you can't have any laws there because it's nothing. So either way, that would be my certain point where I would say I'm kind of uncertain about it, but it seems pretty reasonable that you and I would both accept
something prior to the origin of our
eternality.
Universe. Yes. Yep.
That seems like the most plausible way for me to understand reality, and the most plausible way for you to understand reality.
Yep.
Okay.
That reality depends upon some pre-eternal existing. We'll just call it the quality of eternality is necessary for our universe.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty cool. Two guys having a cup of coffee and eating pie that look at the pale blue dot, Copernicus, everything. Completely different views of reality. Can at least agree that there's a necessary eternality to reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, the universe. So to bring it back for me, to bring it back to Scripture, the ending of John's Gospel. A lot of scholars believe the Gospels are kind of formed on ancient biographies. So you look at some of the lives of the lives and things that are written about ancient persons. They're biographies to some extent. And so John's Gospel concludes with the tag. It says, I suppose if we wrote down everything that Jesus did, there would not be enough room in the world to contain all the books that were written. So John's being a little hyperbolic because he knows he's writing to an audience that knows what happened, and would know that John is omitting certain things that Jesus did. So that ending is kind of an apology almost to his audience to say, look, there are many other things that Jesus did. I did not write them all down, but if we wrote everything down that Jesus did, that the world could not contain all the books that are in there. And so the interesting thing for me there is the word cosmos is the word for world in that verse. John is saying not even the cosmos could contain all the books that were written if we wrote down everything that Jesus is. Now, it's a little hyperbolic, but I think that the universe itself, the cosmos itself, is one expression of that eternality. And I think first and foremost, more than a scientific event, I think the universe it's like the pie. It's an expression of love and a desire for relationship, and that awe and wonder and everything is God's expression to us. I think this is a little different than what you hear in modern apologetics, but I think the universe is an expression of God's love first and foremost, and its beauty and His grandeur and His wonder, and it's just a sliver of it. And it's when He begins His discourse in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of the heavens. Matthew's Greek uses the plural, ton oranon. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And so what we have in the universe is a metaphor for God's gifts to us, both now and eternally. These are expressions of, so Jesus talking to poor people and people of broken heart and broken spirit, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. Your inheritance is as glorious, if not more glorious, than the heavens that I have created. And John the Baptist says, repent, for the kingdom of the heavens is at hand. So Jesus comes down, the very kingdom of the heavens itself, what David is contemplating in Psalm 8 and Psalm 19, is fulfilled in Christ. Christ is the Lord and the King of the heavens who comes down to our pale blue dot and tells us He loves us. And that's my version of the eternality that's behind the origin of the universe.
Was that your altar call?
Huh?
Was that the...
I got an email from somebody on Dogma Debate who called me Pastor Dan. So since it's 1 o'clock, that could be my altar call.
It could be.
We could leave it there.
Before you go, I wanted to ask you about Trump, abortion, and the threat of artificial intelligence real quick.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, no. You want to?
No,
Okay.
Oh, God.
Oh, my God.
It took us this long just to figure it out.
I can answer them in a minute if you want, but that's okay.
At least we explain the origin of the universe.
We got to eternality.
If you can't do that in a coffee shop, I don't know what you can do.
Well, like Carl Sagan said, if you wish to make apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. So, Robert, the pie is an expression of the invention of the universe.
That's beautiful, man.
It's got some eternality in
Cool.
it.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to bring Rob over. Rob, is it a good time to talk to you? Rob is the owner of this awesome establishment.
Okay.
Tell us about this coffee shop, man.
Yeah, it's called Peggy's Coffee House, and that's in memory of my mom. And kind of what happened there was I had a small business in this Temple Mall, and this coffee shop had been here before as the name Cuppy's Coffee, and the lady just decided to retire, do something less stressful, kind of just walk away from it. So I saw an opportunity to keep it alive, and going through names, kind of funny names, crafty names, catchy names, I just decided on something with a little more meaning. Unfortunately, my mom had passed away just before it became an opportunity to do this, and as we were thinking about her and what everybody kind of said at the memorial service for her, it was that no matter where she was, she always made it feel like home. So we decided to put the name Peggy's Coffee House on here instead of coffee shop, and we try to do it where when you walk in here, it's almost like you've stepped out of the mall into a comfortable environment, a friendly environment.
It's totally different.
That's kind of what we were going for. I myself was born in Austin. My mom grew up in Austin, and so we get a lot of compliments saying it has an Austin vibe to it. Wasn't on purpose, just kind of part of the natural of it.
Yeah, I can see that. The brick wall.
Yeah.
All the stuff.
We
on
just
the
want
wall.
you to come in and feel comfortable, and then with our customer service and our employees, what we push is kind of hopefully what my mom taught me, how to treat people. You know, everybody's welcome. Everybody has got a seat here. There's nothing different. We're all the same. We're all here together in it, and we just want to make everybody feel like they're welcome, comfortable, invited, and gonna get a really good cup of coffee or other drinks that we have here. We don't just do coffee. We don't limit it to that, but everything's made fresh by hand, artisan, handcrafted, and we're here just to have you come hang out for a little while.
That's
take
awesome,
a break.
dude.
So,
Where'd the universe come from, Rob?
where did the universe come from?
That's what Dan here was explaining to us.
That's a good question, and I've done my share of studies to try to understand that, and of course, there's never one answer there. But what I've tried to limit it for myself, if I'm allowed to say that, I like science, I like math, and I know that in math there's formulas, there's mathematical equations that exist that we've discovered in the universe, throughout everything that sort of is. There's numbers there, and they work. The formulas are there. We just found them. We didn't come up with them, and it's hard to think that all these mathematical equations that go really deep into some of the heavier parts of math could have just happened by chance. And for me, if those formulas are there and they exist and they were there before we knew they were and we discovered them, that equates to a design. I mean, when you design something, you use formulas, you use equations, you use specs, whatever it is. If there's a design, there's got to be a designer. Whatever it is, something had to have designed it if the numbers are there and if the numbers work. We figured out how they work and how they were there, but they were there long before we knew they were. So that's kind of where I summarize it for myself.
That's your answer.
So
that's pretty cool.
That's the way I
Pretty
look
cool.
at it. Yes, sir.
I love your coffee shop, man.
Well, thank you.
It is awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome.
We're 3 years old. We've got a theater next door. Our drinks are allowed in over there.
Yeah,
That's
you even have a
really cool
butterbeer.
Butterbeer, we
From the
do.
Harry
It was
Potter
a
thing?
huge hit last year. We crafted it just like the one they serve at Universal Studios at the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. Became a huge hit. Being able to take that into the movie with you. We have the world's strongest coffee, which is Death Wish coffee. A unique blend of the most caffeinated beans on earth. They use a slow roast technique, and they're the only ones that can do it because they patented it. And you get the darkest roast without cooking out the caffeine like all the rest of the dark roasts do. So you get the dark, it's smooth, and it's the most caffeinated on the planet Earth. In the universe, I guess we could say.
In the universe.
But there it is.
Designed by God.
Right here in Temple, Texas. You can get butterbeer or Death Wish coffee, or we'll drop 2 shots of Death Wish espresso on top of a butterbeer and call it a Deathly Hollows.
Deathly Hollows.
However
That's
you want
clever.
it. We can
That's
do it.
clever.
We've
Well,
got
thanks,
it.
Rob, man.
You're
I
very
appreciate
welcome.
your
Thank
time,
you
dude.
guys for being
Appreciate
here.
you letting us use your establishment.
Yes, sir.
Dan, thanks so much for your time today, buddy. Really good having you on. Is there any way, one more time, that you want to let people figure out how they can find you, or learn more about you, contact you, throw money at you?
Oh, gosh,
whatever they
yeah,
can
that'd be
do.
great.
Get pie recipes.
Pie recipes, arguments, correspondence, whatever you feel like doing. Psalm 1968, PSALM 1968 @gmail.com. And then I have a fledgling podcast that I just started with my planetary scientist friend Wayne, and it's called Good Heavens, a podcast about the universe with Wayne and Dan. And we have.
Can you do that again? The Good Heavens.
Good Heavens, a podcast about the universe with Wayne and Dan. The idea is Good Heavens is an epithet of surprise, so we're always talking about cool things that make you go wow and good heavens, right?
I gotta check that out. That sounds awesome.
So we have 3 episodes: one on the recent solar eclipse, one on the planet Jupiter, and one on with Alan Hayline, who's got a physics background and does a wonderful job with the fine-tuning argument of the universe.
Wow.
So SoundCloud, Good Heavens with an exclamation point. It's under my name, Daniel Ray, and there's 3 episodes on there right now. We are planning to make a move to stay on SoundCloud perhaps and move over to Patreon at some point. I already have the page started. We haven't started recording podcasts on Patreon, but that will be in the coming months, hopefully. So, and my friend Wayne he presents papers. He's got his knack is planetary science. He's a fascinating character. Humble guy, didn't want to do the podcast initially. We had to kind of coax him into it, but now he's going. We're really getting it. It's a lot of fun.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for the pie.
Oh, you're welcome.
And, I'd love to do this again sometime.
Yes.
Do you do other than apple?
Do I do other? Oh, yes, I do a cherry.
Pies?
I do a cherry.
Mm-hmm. Can we do cherry next time?
We can do a cherry next time.
Maybe I can come up to your town next time, or we can come back to this coffee shop.
You can come to my barn and we can do stargazing.
Awesome.
Yeah, I live out in rural Texas, northwest of Weatherford, and
hey, wouldn't that be a neat thing? Like we
could do podcasting outside with the stars.
Wow.
Yeah.
And if there was like the crickets chirping or something, that'd be.
Oh, and
cool.
I do have crickets chirping. They're in my barn sometimes, even so.
Nice.
Yeah, it's real. It's dark skies and it's beautiful. I have a 10-inch Dobsonian telescope, and I can see galaxies and star clusters. It's fantastic.
So cool. So cool. All right, man. Well, thanks, and have a great day.
All right. Take care.
Yeah. Oh, good. What did you end up getting? Oh, that's one of my favorite.
Music for this episode was brought to you by A Lost State of Mind. Hear more at loststateofmind.com. We've been talking to Dan Ray in Temple, Texas at the prestigious Peggy's Coffee House at 3111 South 31st Street, home of the Deathly Hallows butter beer mug of doomy deliciousness. I can't remember what he called it. But anyway, I can vouch for the iced latte. Next week, we will be talking to David Fitzgerald concerning the historicity of Christ. The week thereafter will be a lot of fun with Odd Atheist Friends discussing transgender issues. Then episode 30 will be the big one, baby. The one you've been waiting for, the reverse debate where I play the role of the Christian Apologist and argue philosophy with Justin Schreiber. That debate will be moderated by Kelly Clemenson, then a follow-up with Hertzy Hertz from Atheist Talk Radio. I really enjoyed talking to Mr. Ray today. What a great idea. A lot of fun. If you enjoyed this style as opposed to the studio, kind of like that ambient sound and all that kind of stuff, let me know on Facebook or at Right to Reason 1 on Twitter. We might just do more of these kinds of episodes. I was thinking maybe on a boat on the lake, or what Dan recommended, an old barn at night, far away from anyone that can hear my screams. He might just be trying to murder me. Not sure. Learn more at therighttoreason.com and support our message at patreon.com/right. David Fitzgerald and I will talk to you crazy people next week, but between now and then, remember, you have the right to reason.
Mama got mad at Papa, 'cause he didn't bring no coffee home. Mama got mad at Papa,